what we say, we take on. I think that with this disease, it's important to recognize that we have it. And then once I really recognized and accepted that, I want to move out of disease and into wellness. And so I just like to kind of share that that's why I say that. And also just kind of leave some room as you are developing your own recovery journey to have things that are personal to you. So I'm really excited to be here tonight to share my experience, strength, and hope with you all. You know, I think, is there anybody in here that wanted this seat, like that was like, hey, when I grow up, I want to sit in the pavilion and be challenged with this disease? Because I was not, you know, this is a really, really challenging thing to have. And I want to be really clear that we have a disease. It's a disease. It's not a moral failing. There's a lot of stigma around this disease, and that's sad for us, you know. And also what I've learned in life with trials and tribulations is those things that are really, really challenging, if depending on how I look at it and what I do with it, it can also be my greatest gift. And so for me, what it was like is that I got dealt a certain hand, and genetically, because it's a disease, just like if we had heart disease or something like that, if you have lineage that is with addiction, your likelihood to have addiction is higher. And so both sides of my family have addiction. I say for fun that, you know, to convenience sake, we're going to hold our family reunion in the parking lot of a liquor store because it's just going to be more convenient and easier for everybody. And that is sadly kind of a reality. Like that is how my family operated. And also it's just, we right now, what we're doing, if we choose to answer the call, so Warren says, who I love dearly, we are changing generations of family challenges. Like you have the ability to do that if you move forward with your recovery. So anyway, so my family, you know, both sides, alcoholism. My mother, bless her heart, is a very, very sick person, undiagnosed, a lot of mental disorders, probably borderline personality, narcissism, alcoholism, eating disorder, drug addiction, you name it, she had it, right? And I had a lot of resentment around that later in life. And earlier in life, I just wanted to please, and I wanted her to love me. And so my mother at 5 years old gave me alcohol. And that's probably not the best move a mom can make, but she did the best she could in her own way, you know. So I wasn't full on drinking all the time by the time I was 5, no doubt, but you know, it was offered to me at that age. We drank in our house. It was like a normal thing. I remember my grandfather coming down from Michigan. I was probably in 2nd grade, and I was making my grandpa a 7 in water at 10 in the morning so he could sit by the pool all day and get drunk. You know, like that's what happened in my family, and that was normal. That I didn't know any different, you know. And my father, bless his heart, and you know, the only time he didn't drink, he was working. So if he wasn't working, he was drinking, and he never got belligerent, but he was also not present, and he was not able to emotionally be available really at all, you know. So that's what kind of what I grew up with. And I remember, you know, being an adolescent, the first time I ever smoked pot was with my mother. And at the time when I was 14, I was like, oh, that's cool. Well, it's actually not really that cool. It wasn't so helpful, turns out. And at 16, she gave me cocaine. So there's, you know, thanks, Mom, for all of these gifts. I really appreciate the challenges and the lessons. And so, so, you know, it's like, for me, it was kind of like a wonder in a matter of time. The first time I drank liquor, I blacked out. It's not normal to black out. It's just not. We normalize drinking in our culture, but that is a symptom of this potentially being a disease that you carry, if that's something that happens to you. And so I was scared of liquor because I blacked out and I did not like my behavior. That's another symptom of mental disease, is behavior. Like, how does your behavior show up? Are you the next day feeling shame for the things you did, having to clean up lots of messes? If that's the case, that's another symptom of this potentially being a disease. And so, so I avoided liquor. I really didn't drink too much for a long time. I smoked a lot of pot for a long time. And then I did start drinking regularly. So I think I started smoking cigarettes, which I hated cigarettes, but started smoking at 14 to connect with my mother and sister. Because they both smoked, and that's how we connected, right? And so we smoked pot, we smoked cigarettes, and we drank together. And that was like a day in the life of the family of us. And so the drinking didn't progress until about my early 20s, but it was normalized. And what I found for myself is that I sought out employment that supported my choices of lifestyle. So that looked like I became a whitewater rafting guide, and I was a bartender, and that made it really convenient for me to drink all I wanted because that was also normal in that culture. So that happened, and had plenty of the episodes of just like, oh gosh, like that shame, those feelings that eats away at your soul. If you have ever experienced that, like that, we're killing, the disease is killing us. That's the disease hard at work. When you have that, like, we're dying. There's parts of us inside that are just being sucked the life away from. So it got to the point, there's like so much trauma. Like, I don't want to get into the details of the trauma, but there's like massive amounts of trauma. My life was nothing but trauma, absolutely zero regulation of central nervous system from generations before on my mother's side to me, to anything, like just so much of it. So it really got heavy for me in my early 30s. And I decided, with the help of friends pointing it out, like, hey, you might have some issues here that need to be addressed. I went to treatment in Texas, in Arbor. The Arbor was the facility, and it was in Georgetown, Texas. And so that was a facility that I went to. My first time, it was 90 days. And it was AA format. And the way that they delivered the information to me, how my perception of it at that time and even now, was very fear-based. And it was very like, you must do it this way, shoved down your throat. If you don't do it this way, you are going to be a tornado in everybody's life. You take one sip of alcohol and the shit will hit the fan, right? And so I was like, what do I do? I'm just going to try to do everything like a robot because that's what I got to do to be okay because I'm broken, so I lived in that kind of space for about 5 years. I was sober for 5 years. But I was not really connecting with the community of AA. And I want to be specific that it was the community. The program of AA, 100%, the 12 steps, like I wish everybody would live like that. The people that I was with in that particular community, one of the things that they say at this meeting is, if you don't connect, keep going to different meetings because eventually you'll find your tribe. And I do believe that to be true. And one of the silver linings of COVID is there's like way more availability now to find like nuanced groups that might suit your needs. And they're always available. I mean, it's like you can just be on Zoom to do it. I do encourage in-person meetings as well, but I could be in a meeting in Dubai. It's like, yeah, that's pretty cool, and I could be in a meeting with specific people. So that community didn't feel really supportive of me and in my experience there in my first go round. And what happened for me is that after 1 year of not drinking, the facility that I was at, okay, so I want to name that this is a disease, it's the disease in the brain. So I didn't know, my disease led me. It's like saying, go here, learn this so that you can understand, so that you can heal, and so that you can help others. essentially, like, the brain is fascinating. And so this is a disease of the brain. And a lot of this information is really new. Like the neuroscience that we're finding now, like, didn't necessarily exist 20 or even 10 years ago. So one of the things that has changed since I was in treatment the first time is at that time, they were saying the best protocol is, if you're going to make a change, that you just make a change with, your drug of choice, whatever drug that may be, or alcohol, but like, go ahead and still smoke, right? And so that's what I did. And so after 1 year, and that is actually, I want to name, like, that is not what research shows the case to be now. It's better to stop all of them at once. And it's hard. This is not easy, okay? But it's better to stop all of them at once than it is to do one at a time. And it's because of the way the disease of addiction works. It doesn't matter what your drug of choice is. The disease is going to be working in any of those drugs, whether it's nicotine, whether it's marijuana, whether it's cocaine, ecstasy, alcohol. So like, if my drug of choice is alcohol and I say, oh, well, I'm sober on alcohol, but I'm smoking pot. My experience, and as the research shows, is that I can do that for a while, and then the pot will always take me back to the drug of choice, the alcohol, for me. And if it's somebody else, it's like, oh, well, heroin's my issue, so I'm just going to drink. That is in the way that it works in our brain, that won't translate, and old patterns will come back. So essentially, you'll be back in disease if you don't choose to take all of those away. So 1 year after I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, and I didn't know really, like, I didn't have a good plan. I was just like, all right, I'm going to stop smoking. And I got really depressed. Like, that happens. And one of the things too, and this is one of the things that I love that Pavillon gives us education about, but so not only is it, drugs and alcohol, it's sugar. Holy shit, it was sugar. I didn't know what happened. I stopped smoking and I could not stop eating sugar. So now I'm in like a freaking eating disorder, which was horrible. I gained about like 40 pounds in 2 months, and I was so depressed. The AA community there, essentially, they and I'll never forget this, because it's just, you don't forget the unkind things that people say. And it was like, well, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it must be a duck you're drinking. And I'm like, fuck you. I am not. I'm depressed, and no. And so I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. And so I went to a therapist. And I did a lot of trauma work with her, and it was amazing. We did amazing work, and I was so grateful to have had this opportunity. And I put 100% of my trust into this woman. I went religiously every week for 2 years. And as I was on my journey with her and really kind of understanding the background of my family that I hadn't yet understood, I decided, oh, I think I might want to be a therapist. And so I live now in Clayton, Georgia, and there's a company it's wilderness therapy for youth in crisis. And so I decided that, Clayton was where I always wanted to go to. I'm a river person. There's the river there, and I can do this work, and I can check it out and see if I want to become a therapist. And so I made the move, and I worked for this company as a field staff, and it was great. But what I didn't have was the sober community, right? So I had changed. One of the things that I had to do the first go around is like we have to change our whole lifestyle. Like, what was I doing? Who was I hanging out with, and what were we doing? Essentially, I was drinking all of the time. And I think you may have heard it, like, when we're getting sober, it's really important to put as much energy into recovery as we did into drinking. And for me, it was a lot of time and energy that I put into drinking. So I needed to do that for recovery now. And so I made those changes in Texas. And then once I moved back here, I don't have tons of friends. I have 1 or 2 good friends, and that worked for me for a while, but I didn't have a recovery community. And I think that's really important, because what ended up happening in my experience is, so then I'm at this wilderness therapy program, and essentially worked as a field staff, then did some administrative work, and then landed like my dream job. I'm the health and wellness coordinator. I teach yoga. I was led to yoga by being in treatment for the first time. That was something that really called to me, so I pursued it, and I became an instructor. and I teach mindfulness. And so I was doing all of these things. And then I had like family issues. A family issue came up. So I made a call to my therapist in Texas, Dr. O, we'll call her Dr. O. And I called her up, and I'll never forget. And I was like, oh, I just turned five years sober. And she's like, what are you doing? And I told her about Blue Ridge and mindfulness and yoga and being on the river, and just kind of like, I'm a very passionate person, so I get excited about life. And she was kind of hearing that. And she's like, I think for you that it's not the disease of alcoholism. I think for you, you could just be mindful and drink. And that is not good recommendation from a therapist. If you ever get that recommendation, I suggest that you don't take it. But what happened for me in that case, it wasn't like I ran around and got drunk that night. The disease was working. The disease was like waiting for some permission, right? So I like to think of it too. If I'm not on it, it's like in the parking lot doing push-ups, just getting strong, waiting for me to not be strong. It wants to take back over. So I didn't act on that initially. It actually took 4 months, but then I remember it being a cold day and deciding that, I wanted to have a hot bath and drink a glass of wine, and I can do it. Like, I can do that. Why not? Well, okay, so let's go back to that. This is a disease, and essentially it is an allergy. Our brains work in a way that we have rewired them, that it puts the drugs or the alcohol or the addiction piece, it puts that above anything that we want or need to survive. So it puts it above food, water, sex, and it says, this is what I need most, right? And so with my first go around in treatment, my perception with what they told me is one drop and the wheels were going to fall off. And that is not what happened for me. What happened for me is that it looked normal for a long time. Essentially, I had what I now call a 3-year relapse. And so for about 1.5 years of that 3-year relapse, it was normal drinking, and I was having fun. I mean, there's a part of it, right, that was really fun and able to connect. And you're like, wow. For me, it felt like, oh, I've got my freedom back. I can like, thank you, like this is great. Until it wasn't great. Then it started getting really shitty, like not just a little, but it took time. It wasn't like the wheels just immediately fell off. I think different people have different experiences. I think that can happen, and it has happened, and I've heard stories of that. And my story was like, oh, everything's cool. So what ends up happening in that is what fires together wires together from a neuroscientific standpoint. So it didn't start out daily drinking, but it went to daily drinking. And each time I'm doing that, I'm creating these grooves that are deeper and deeper in my brain. And I'm like just reinforcing this, no matter what the habit is, if it's exercise and drinking water, or if it's drinking alcohol. But because I have this disease, like it overrides those other choices, right? And so that groove is just getting bigger and deeper and just stronger. And then about 1.5 years into it, I started having those feelings like, ooh, this is not okay. Like, I don't like this, some behavior. And I would tell people, I would tell my friends, my beautiful friends, and say, hey, this is going on. And they're like, oh no, you're fine. Like, that happens. And I say that because I think that's why it's really important to have some people that are sober in your community that can kind of see and understand that within you, because it's so normalized. Over drinking in our culture is so normalized. Like there's songs that young people are listening to that are like blacking out. It's like totally okay. Like, that's what happens. No big deal. Actually, it is, And so as I'm telling these friends when these behaviors are happening and I'm feeling this shame, like, hey, this happened, I don't feel good about it. And they're telling me, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Well, that's my disease saying, cool, that's what I want to hear. Like, let's keep doing this, until I got to the point where I couldn't stop. Like, I essentially, by the time I made it to the Pavillon, it wasn't all day every day, but there were days that it was like round the clock. I lost interest in the things that I love. I'm a huge outdoor person. And before coming to Pavillon, I was in my living room drinking probably 3 bottles of champagne a day, not going outside. And that's from a person that would love to do things all the time. And this is like waking up and just having mimosas. Like, that sounds like fun, right? But that was not fun. And so that's where my disease took me. It took me also to some other ugly places that I didn't want to go, that looked like drinking and driving. And by the grace of God, I'm not in prison. I could be, I could be dead. That would probably have been the better alternative than if I would have gotten into an accident and killed somebody else and had to live in prison with that guilt. So somehow there's a reason that I have been spared. And my hope is to take that and one of the things that kind of came to be with this go around is the first time around, as I was looking at my familial stuff, I was so angry and so resentful of my mother, particularly my mother. And so I just wanted to flame and, you did this and that's why I'm that way. And, And what I've realized this time around is she did the best she could with what she had, and she carried her generations of stuff and didn't know how to stop that pattern. So I have been gifted this opportunity to be the truth teller in my family, which also makes me the scapegoat and not the most popular person, but I can change these generations of all that ickiness. And I can come back with compassion and love. So now I can look at my mom and I can say, Mom, what you did was not okay at all. It wasn't okay, but I understand it. I understand it because I know you didn't mean to do it in the same way I didn't mean to do the things I was doing that I will be having to make amends about too. And so I offer that it's a very big cycle, but it's also, let's have compassion. Let's learn to have, for me, I have to learn to have compassion for myself, right? I have to say, hey, this is part of what keeps the disease strong is that shame piece. That shame piece will kill us. And so what I've learned to do is recognize that, hey, I'm feeling shame. And, I love Brene Brown. If y'all haven't read any of Brene Brown or listened to any of her talks, I highly recommend it. You may have already heard this, but guilt is that I've done something bad, and shame is that I am bad. Like inherently as a human, I'm just bad. And so what I can do is I can recognize, oh, here's this shame. And what I wanted to do, I'm 100% type A perfectionist, right? So I don't want anybody to see this ugly stuff. Like, I don't want them to see it like that. I don't know, like I push it away. Like I get repulsed by my own self, right? And so essentially that's shame. And so what I've learned to do is feel it. Our body, mindfulness is such a powerful tool in recovery. And so as we begin to cultivate mindful practices, we can start to tune into our body, our somatic symptoms. Our bodies speak to us. So when I feel that shame, I feel that heaviness, I feel that pit in my gut. I just feel icky, right? And so what I've learned to do is recognize, hey, that's shame. And I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna bring you in. I know that I've said that you're ugly, and you are ugly. And also I'm gonna accept that you're part of me. And I'm gonna show people like, hey, like this is an ugly part of me. And how can I make it my gift? Essentially, if I want to, what am I gonna do with it, right? So we can take this thing that's so challenging and we can totally make it a gift. It's a lot of work. One of the things that in my family history, my sister has brain cancer. She's had brain cancer since she was 28 and she's 44 now. So for a long time, and it's really sad, and I feel sad for her. And also, she lives like she's a victim. That's where she gets her power from, right? So that feels sad to me. I don't want to do that. I want to inspire. The other piece of it, though, is that when you have a disease like, some kind of cardiovascular disease, some kind of diabetes even is one that could, like, we don't necessarily, diabetes, there's a bit of a choice with that. But like with brain cancer, you can't just say, oh, okay, if I choose to live a spiritual life and have a connection with source, whatever that is for you. And that's one of the things that's great is that you can personalize it. I like to think of spirituality as a fingerprint. It can look really similar for lots of people, but we can individualize this stuff, right? And so, I had a big aversion, huge aversion. I grew up Catholic. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. So I was like, the whole God thing was like, ooh, the first time around, I had to work hard on what that meant. And for me, what I landed on is that God is the energy of love, compassion, and kindness. Not this man in the clouds that is gonna, essentially be a fear-based kind of dictator and ruler. And if I do something wrong, then I'm this terrible person that is going to be punished. The God that of my understanding is those ugly pieces that God looks at and says, those are part of you. I gave them to you for a reason. You are beautiful, therefore they are beautiful. And so, so that energy, that's, I think, a really big piece of like this whole, it is a huge piece of this whole program, is to develop and cultivate a relationship with source. And one of the things that my perception was to begin with was that, well, I've thoroughly screwed up here, right? Like Warren says, we didn't get these chairs on a winning streak. Well, I certainly didn't, right? And so, so I thought turning my will and my life over to whatever the God of my understanding is meant like, I suck, here's all my power because I can't do this. And so one of the things that I learned by this delightful place of the Pavillon and Wolf, a big shout out to Wolf, anybody spend some time with him? He's amazing. Is that let's look at it in a different way. Let's co-create. Like, yeah, you need some help here, but you have agency in this too. So like, how do you want, we can use mindful practices of visualization and what are my values? How do I want to show up for myself in relationship? How do I want to show up with the people that I love? And it's going to take some work to get there. But if I just call in source and I call in my spirit guides, I think of Wolf with that too, calling in the spirit guides as he's riding his motorcycle. I do that now every morning. What I've learned on that spiritual level, it's not a dimension that we will ever fully understand in this arena because we're in human form, right? So there's some things that we can understand, and there are some things that science is like kind of catching up to on that spiritual level, like energetic fields. And also we're never going to be able to understand all of it. So there has to be like a little component of faith, and that might wax and wane, and that's okay, but I think just calling that in and just saying, for me, morning, like those energies need to be called, for me, they need to be called in. They're not just going to show up. So in the morning I wake up, I say, I'm grateful. What am I grateful for? Like, that's a huge piece of, it's a lot of buzz these days, but the gratitude, essentially, when we can focus on the things that we're grateful for, a couple of things are happening there. We're actually building gray matter in our prefrontal cortex, and that's going to help us keep our logical thinking brain online longer so that we can make decisions that are value aligned. So that's happening with it. And also, our brains are designed for negativity bias. That's a survival mechanism. Anybody hear of negativity bias? Did we learn that here yet? So we're designed to focus on the negative because that's what kept us alive. Essentially, there was a time that we could have been a saber-toothed tiger's lunch. And so we're like constantly looking over our shoulder to see what's going to kill us. And so that's what we are designed, our brains are programmed to focus on that. And what happens when you focus on something? It gets bigger, right? And so with mindfulness, what we can do is we can notice, oh, here I am. It takes time and practice, but here I am being human, focusing on this negative thing. And so now I'm going to shift my awareness. And in this very moment, name 3 things that I'm grateful for. And so when we focus on lack, we invite more lack into our life. When we focus on victim, we invite more of that energy and that mentality. When we focus on recovery, when we focus on wellness, when we focus on the good things, we invite more of that in. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be challenges for sure. It's not a cakewalk at all. But yeah, so for me, what it was like, it sucked. What happened? I essentially was drinking at work. Yeah, in a industry where I'm teaching mindfulness and yoga because I was not doing my own practice, and because the disease got the better of me, I was drinking at work. And by the grace of God, my employers are amazing, and we are in this industry and they have understanding. And that's where I feel hope for the stigma shifting, because that is happening. More insurances are understanding that this is a big deal. We are here to learn and to change our behaviors. And so 6 weeks might seem like a long time. If you're in EC, 12 weeks probably seems even longer, because it is, right? The reality is that to change a behavior, it's making that new neural pathway, right? So if I'm in that groove of 20, 40 years of substance use, that groove is really well worn. I like to think of it like an interstate, right? So now I'm like, that's not working. So I need to do something different. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go that recovery path. And what that looks like the backwoods. There's no trail. There's roto everywhere. And I have to make a trail. Okay. So that takes energy and work, and it's slow. And essentially, how long does it take to change a behavior? Anybody have a thought on that?
30 days.
30 days. Any other thoughts?
21.
21. That's the beginning. That's like finding where you want to go into the woods and getting out your little saw. So essentially, the transtheoretical model of change is a behavioral change diagram that was made specifically for addiction in the 70s, but it relates to any behavior change that we want to apply it to, because behavior change is hard and it's changing those neural pathways. So as we go from pre-contemplation, meaning like nothing's wrong, I'm in my disease and I'm just drinking away or drugging away, and I'm just not acknowledging that there's an issue. And then typically there has to be an external stimulus for us to want to start to think about something different. In my case, in the beginning, that it went from pre-contemplation to contemplation. I'm thinking that there's an issue here because of this shame that I have, this feeling that I have. And then from contemplation goes to preparation. So now I'm like with the preparation, that might look like, oh, I'm talking to some friends and that didn't work. So now they're saying it's okay. I've relapsed. Relapsed is a return to old behavior. As we start to change our behaviors, we will relapse. It's going to happen. It doesn't mean we have to go on a 3-year bender, but it does mean that we are going to go back into those old behavior changes. So I say that because I would like for you guys to start to cultivate that self-compassion and just understanding that, like, we're here, we're human, we're having this experience, we're going to make mistakes. So what we can do is with mindfulness, we can acknowledge, I've made this mistake. And so now let's get back on track. It does not have to be like this bigger thing. The good thing with the transtheoretical model of change, it's an upward spiral. So as I went from the superhighway to the backcountry, like that work that I did to start to make that trail, it doesn't disappear. It's still there. So those 5 years that I put into recovery before the relapse, they didn't disappear. I already had that foundation coming into it. So as I landed in preparation to action at the Pavillon, right, I looked at this as an opportunity. I looked at it as like a retreat. I am taking time out of life, and I'm doing what I need to do to get well so that I can change these patterns for myself and for others and leave the world hopefully a little bit better than when I got here. And so back to the amount of time it takes as we're in action, it takes, okay, so let's all just take a deep breath. It takes 12 to 18 months of solid action for you to change your homeostasis, to go to a different behavior, to replace for the new behavior to replace the old, which is why they have things set up like a 6-week program. We're getting that trail started, right? That's why they say 90 meetings in 90 days. That's why they have the milestones of, it's 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, right? And then 18. And within that time frame, they're also saying, hey, this is probably not a great idea to be getting in a relationship. And the reason for that is because a lot of this, one of the things that the Pavillon gave me the gift of with Jocelyn, I love Jocelyn, anybody shout out to her, she's amazing. She made me read the book ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And as I read that book, I was like, whoa, things just started clicking and making sense. And essentially, you know, a big part of this disease is we're emotionally codependent people. So we have to learn how, one of the things to do with this, okay, so why are we even doing this to begin with? Because we don't want to feel the way that we're feeling. We want to change that. We don't want to feel it. We want to numb it. We want to avoid it. So we do this other thing so that we don't have to look at that feeling. Now, when we choose to stop, we're sober, we're not with substances, but now we have to feel, right? And so the other piece with mindfulness and with things like yoga, when we practice these things regularly, we increase our emotional capacity. We learn how to sit with the challenging emotions. We learn how to sit with shame and say, oh my God, that feels horrible. And previously I would feel so horrible that I would go drink more. Now I can sit with it and say, oh, here I'm feeling that, but I can sit with it and I can understand it and I can love it and let it be a part of me, that ugly part, and I can bring that in and I can tolerate that. I can do hard things. We can do hard things. And that's what this is. It's building our resilience. It's building our capacity to experience those challenging emotions without running from them. And then conversely, whatever level we get to, that we're able to experience these really challenging emotions and unpack those generations of stuff. Once we can process that, we are going to be able to experience joy in a way that we never had. And so one of the things I think culturally that's sad is we focus on, let's be happy, right? I know that I actually said that was what I wanted to do when I grow up. I want to be happy. The reality is happiness is an emotion and emotions change. That's part of the human experience. So what I've learned is my goal is no longer to be happy. My goal is to be able to tolerate any challenging emotion and experience the fullness of the emotions that I enjoy, and just be able to be a human in that experience, because we are humans and these emotions will come. Life is hard. No matter how, you know, great somebody's life seems, life is, there will be trauma. Like regardless of if you have challenging family systems, somebody that you love is probably going to die. A pet might die. You might have an injury. Like 1 year ago, I was nearly paralyzed. I'm lucky to be walking. Things happen in life. And so how are we going to show up and deal with it? You know, we can, if we learn how to manage these emotions. And essentially that's all with the spiritual foundation. And that, like one of the things we've heard, good orderly direction, we've heard that, right? I want to give a shout out to Katie, who showed me a new one or told me a new one this week, and it's the great outdoors. So it's whatever works for you, you know? So I really want to kind of emphasize that piece. Like I think it's a really important piece to identify, like what is going to work for you. And then the two is came to believe. You don't have to have it figured out right now. And it can change over time. But the goal here is to cultivate and develop a spiritual practice and connection with source, so that when we sit in those moments of silence, we have intuition. Has anybody ever experienced intuition? You have that voice. It's like, hey, do this. And a lot of times we don't listen. I know I don't. But when we get quiet, we can hear that. And essentially that is being connected. When you hear in connection, or when you hear intuition, source is speaking to you. And so when we get quiet in these moments of mindfulness and these moments of meditative exercise or yoga, then we can be more in touch with ourself that is in touch with source. And with that, we can be in recovery rather than in disease. And we can give back to our fellows, you know, our families, our society. Yeah. Wow. So I talked a lot. I need to take a drink of water.